We are back with another Fantasia Fest 2022 official selection. What's going on, guys? Welcome to Victims and Villains. If you guys are new to our content, we create content like what you're watching right now simply to educate and engage individuals like yourselves on mental health awareness and suicide prevention through pop culture. My name is Captain Nostalgia. I am a writer, podcaster, and the director of our film festival titled Horrific Hope, all of which you guys can find links for in the descriptions, along with our social media, Patreon, more movie reviews like this, podcasts, and most importantly, our mental health resource library. Talk about today's movie, where I just want to throw this out there to any filmmakers or aspiring filmmakers out there. We are now currently accepting submissions to our 2023 film festival season, which will be held in April of next year at the Alamo Draft House in Winchester, Virginia. Links to submit are in the bios below. All of the money that we do not only pays for the festival, but also helps us get mental health resources into more conventions, more film festivals, and more events around the globe. We're going to be talking about My Grandfather's Demons, which tells the story of Rosa, a hardworking employee at a company. Talk about that in just a few minutes. But she goes back to visit her grandfather's home and restores his home after his passing, and kind of finds out a little bit more about him than she'd kind of remembered and or wanted to know. We'll talk about all of these things. What to talk about is the pause that I did after the company. The first act of this movie, the setup, if you will, is really generic. It's probably one of the film's biggest downfalls. Say company, she's like, it's hard to describe. Like, IMDb describes her as a designer, and I don't understand where they get that or where they read that, because when I worked it, she just works at a pretty ordinary office job, 9 to 5. Top of that, she also lives in a generic city. It's supposed to be like fast-paced, very quick, kind of like a New York type city. But again, a lot of these like details of like her current life are background noise to the rest of the movie, and the setup for this just feels kind of half-baked. And the majority of this movie is stop motion animation, and I absolutely love the animation of this movie, except for the setup. If you can't tell, I think this movie was just set up very poorly, and I stick by that. The setup of this movie, before she kind of gets into the inheritance portion and main narrative that really drives the story forward, we're kind of like stuck in this like 3D animation that doesn't quite feel done. It feels like it was made for like an Esurance commercial, and when Esurance saw it, they scrapped it and they made a movie out of it. Like, that's what it feels like. It feels like it's just very poor animation that's done. It feels like poor man's Pixar. Once the story actually gets going, it's a very sad movie. I want to preface that it's a very humanly like driven, emotional story, and I really admire that, because from someone that has lost all of his grandparents before he turned 20, this movie really encapsulated and really brought up a lot of previous emotions. And I think it's really good at connecting with its audience that way. Like, I feel like if you have lost someone in your life, this is what it feels like, and the emotional journey that you're going to go on with Rosa is extremely rewarding. It's really brutally honest. One of the things that I really liked about this movie is that it doesn't just drive this story with rose-colored glasses, because, you know, I have every tattoo on my body, I have the most in memory of my grandmother on my mother's side, and So much so that I even have her name tattooed on my wrist. Me, I remember her as a very sweet, very kind, very just beautiful woman. And if you tell people that grew up around her, she told it like it is. She didn't take crap, and she was a strong, independent woman. And not to say that the version that I have of her is not that, but she was not afraid to lay down the law. And I never saw my grandmother get mad. So like, those two things like just don't exist in my mind. It seems like two completely different people. Here's that example to also say that that's how this movie portrays the grieving process, and it's very beautiful because I feel like as when you're kids, you have these very rose-colored glasses of the grandparents or the parent that you're, you know, grieving, and in the grieving process, sometimes you kind of see the world for how it really is. And the fact that this story and like this character's journey is told through not only actual people that have lived alongside of her grandfather after she left the home, but also at the same time it's also told through demons, quite literally. I think it's such a beautiful juxtaposition to kind of see the real world and humanize the grandfather, but also kind of exploring his demons even in death. The themes of this movie are very strong. I love this movie. I think that thematically this movie is absolutely gorgeous. It's stunning. It's very honest and it's very raw. I think having something like an animation style like stop motion animation portray the rough and raw emotional side is a really intelligent way, because it feels almost like the animation is reflecting the themes and the emotion of the characters in this story, because the paint and the kind of the characters, they look raw and they look real. Quite look as polished as something like Coraline or Nightmare Before Christmas, but they have a real, just raw is like the best word I can describe these characters and how they look. When it comes to the pacing of the movie, the pacing sometimes can be an issue. First act is split between the setup and kind of the introduction into this world. To get into this world, we're kind of split our time between the real world and kind of how the neighbors of Grandpa were kind of saw him and kind of telling a real account of who he is. Flip account, you have this like dream-like sequences where she's interacting with actual demons, and those demons are kind of telling Grandpa's life story at the same time. And the movie never quite seems to balance the two very well. It's either the real life neighbors feel really heavy-handed in certain sequences, and demons kind of are afterthought, and then vice versa. Acting I thought was fine. The writing of this movie, despite its setup and my issues with that, the writing of this movie is really strong. Like I said, it encapsulates a lot of emotions for such a short runtime. This movie clocks in just under 90 minutes, and in that 90 minutes, you're able to go on these character journeys really well. I think character development is another one of the stronger suits on it, because in the beginning of the movie, Rosa is kind of just an average person, and there's nothing really unique about her, and once you kind of get to spend time with her, this journey of getting to know her grandfather also reflects her growth as a character, to where she's no longer a city character focused on herself, but she's now become a rural individual whose actual focus is on other people and trying to break the quote-unquote curses of her grandfather. I'm going to go ahead and give this one a 3 out of 5. I think this movie has a lot to offer. It has beautiful animation, it has great character development, and beautiful themes woven throughout it. But again, a lot of some of the setup and some of the pacing really hold it back from its true potential. As of right now, there are no plans currently, or no announcements have been made to bring My Grandfather's Demons stateside. This is also worth mentioning that this is also Portugal's first ever stop motion animation film, which is pretty impressive to say the least. They really set the bar pretty high for future entries, but keep it tuned to our socials, and if we hear something, we'll let you guys know. Talk about mental health. health. If you're new to our content, this is the point of the video where we take a theme of mental health and we talk about it in hopes to just deconstruct the stigma surrounding mental health, if only for a few minutes. This movie does grief really well, and I would be hard pressed not to talk about the mental health attached to the grief, especially grief after losing someone that basically raised you. I can't speak to someone losing a parent, but I've lost people that I've been really close with, and there are grief is grief, bottom line, and grief manifests itself in so many different ways, and we can either choose to run from it or run into it. Run from it, eventually it is just bottling up everything we're feeling and just kind of pressing it down deep until it eventually explodes, which isn't healthy. Or like Rosa, we decide to run towards grief and embrace it for everything it is. As much as it sucks, it is a beautiful thing where growth can happen. And Rosa is absolutely the case. It's a prime example of the power of growing from grief and understanding how we can actually be better people because of it. And I talked about this in a few of our episodes. I've talked about it in several years of the podcast, but losing a friend to suicide is the reason that I have come to create something like Victims and Villains or Abyss Gazing or any of the number of other podcasts. Is the reason why I'm a mental health advocate, is because that grief and burden of losing someone to suicide drove me to come here. Then on the flip side, I know and understand what it's like to run from grief. When I lost my grandmother, it's something that I didn't process. I bottled down deep inside for over a decade, and it wasn't until I started dating my wife, she said that this isn't healthy. Processing the grief of that death was the first big hurdle that we ever tackled together in our relationship, and it's made me a healthier person because of it. As much as it sucks, there are mental health strings attached with it, and hopefully you're not finding out a whole bunch of weird things about the person that you have lost or that you're grieving, much like Rosa did in this case, because that's a whole nother mental health journey to go through. But just the act of growing from grief really can improve your mental health. It sucks, and it is one of the worst journeys to ever go to, but the ability to talk about it and connect with others outside of it not only creates community, but it also creates clarity and peace for you. I hope this helps, and I hope this is an encouragement when it comes to those that are watching this, that are grieving. Make sure that you guys hit the subscribe button below and check out all of our content coming out with Fantasia Fest. And as I've said in the other Fantasia Fest videos, this is going to be something that we're going to be covering over our video, audio, and written content. So to make sure that you guys are following all of our socials, links are in the descriptions below. And as always, if you or someone you know is watching this video and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, please consider the links in the descriptions below to our mental health resource library. Have a great night.